The oldest and strongest human emotion is fear. And the oldest and strongest type of fear is trepidation of the unknown. When we were children, our parents told us that monsters didn't exist. But we were sure that something was lurking under the bed or in the closet. Fear sees, even if our eyes are closed. Welcome to the realm of the arcane. My name is Lon Strickler. Join me as I examine unexplained creatures, strange manifestations, and remarkable realities. Imagine this next hour as a voyage of discovery to strange lands, seeking not for new territory, but for new knowledge of the supernatural. Come on board as we begin this adventure together. Hey folks, good evening and welcome to another episode of Arcane Radio, where we explore the unexplained here on the Paranormal King Radio Network. I'm your host, Lon Strickler, coming to you within a cannon shot of historic Gettysburg here in the strange state of Pennsylvania. I thank you for joining me. Now, before I introduce my guest, I want to read a narrative from a native Ute who lives in the Unata-Ore Reservation, where an elder Ute man, which was the writer's grandfather, recalled his experiences in Skinwalker Valley, which is in the Uinta Basin where the infamous Skinwalker Ranch is located. Now, he writes, "Hi, I'm about to tell you a story that's absolutely true. My grandpa lived in Mighton, Utah, and he told stories about skinwalkers and how they could take the form of any animal or anyone you knew. I asked him one day, did you ever meet one? He told me, yes. I asked when. It was a very long time ago, before you were even born, before your mother was born. It was when I was young and foolish. I went to the valley, the Skinwalker Valley. It's a valley where life never enters, not even the crows, the very guardians of death, will never go there. They too fear the evil that lives out there." Now, he continued with his story. I went out there to show people that nothing evil existed in the valley, nothing but their fears, but I was wrong. He went on that he had gone to the Skinwalker Valley in his old red Ford truck to prove to everyone that what they thought they knew were just stories and used to scare them. Now, when he reached the valley, he remembered the grass was black, as if it had been burned and survived a fire. The trees looked dead, but were still alive. He told me he had seen a house not far from where he stood. It was old and the roof had caved in. The door was gone, so he walked towards it. There were strange marks on the side of the house. Animal skeletons were strewn about all around the property, as if it was some type of sacred burial ground. Then he heard his grandmother. She had died long ago, but he heard her. The spirits were calling for him, for his life, for his skin, for his blood, and for his soul. They were the lost souls that could change form from man to beast. They chased and scared him and told him that they would never forget him. So whenever I visit my grandpa, he would show me something that was brand new, but had been broken the next day. These spirits would kill his animals, so he finally stopped keeping his dogs outside. It got to the point where I snapped at him, telling that his stories were lies. I told him, prove it. He turned around and pulled his shirt up, and all I could do was gasp as I looked at his back. It was torn here and there. Not one part of his back was unmarked. There were wide claw marks, too straight and too far apart to be made by a human. I was scared and started to cry. I remember my mother running to see what was the matter. She screamed and ranted at my grandpa as she held me, but he did nothing but stare at the field across from the road of his house. She finally gave up and carried me inside. But as I looked over my mother's shoulder, I saw it. A large black dog with white eyes. It was watching Grandpa, and he was watching it as it was waiting for it to attack him. It never did. I never saw that dog again. My grandpa died 2 months later. The doctor said his heart gave out, but I knew that was a lie. His arm had fresh claw marks. That was 42 years ago. No one has ever believed me, but it's a true event. So I'll tell you, so that the world will know. Never look into the skinwalker's eyes. It will never forget you. If you do, sooner or later, it will have your soul. You can fight and refuse to you can fight and refuse to give into the skinwalker's power. But if that's the case, then you hope you're not afraid to die. This was something I received a while back. It's an interesting story. I thought I'd talk about it since the location where this happened was in the Utah Valley and Utah Basin, which is where the actual Skinwalker Ranch is located. Now, I don't know if it was the same location as the ranch, but the reservation is right beside the ranch itself. So who knows? It's an interesting story. So tonight, I welcome cryptozoologist, author, narrator, and musician Lyle Blackburn to Arcane Radio. Now, Lyle has written several acclaimed books, including The Beast of Boggy Creek, Lizard Man, and Momo, The Strange Case of the Missouri Monster, subject matter that reflects his lifelong fascination with legends and sighting reports of unknown creatures. Lyle is also the founder of the rock band Ghoultown and narrator-producer of documentary films such as The Mothman of Point Pleasant, Boggy Creek Monster, and the Bray Road Beast. Lyle is a frequent guest on radio programs such as Coast to Coast AM, has been featured on numerous television shows airing on Animal Planet, Destination America, Discovery Science, and A&E. And when Lyle isn't writing books or hunting monsters or performing with his band, he can be found speaking at various cryptozoology conferences and appearing at horror conventions around the United States. His new book, Sinister Swamps, Monsters and Mysteries From The Mire, is due to be released soon. Lyle's website can be found at lyleblackburn.com. So, Lyle, thanks for coming and joining me this evening.
Thank you. I hope my bio didn't take up the entire time.
No. It's a good bio.
That's right. And I guess I should amend that to say he formally appeared at cryptid events because,
nobody's going anywhere now. Right.
Nobody's appearing. So
I was looking at all the events you were scheduled to be at, and all I see is a cross across each one of them. So,
I left them on there and just started marking them out so people could see they're canceled. But I think it's a given,
Yeah. Well, I think people are trying to do this remotely, but I don't know that. I guess there are mixed results with that, but we have to wait and see. Hopefully, this will get to a point where it's safe enough for everybody to get out there and attend these things, but only time will tell.
That's true. I mean, it'll pass, and maybe we'll have a renewed appreciation of being able to get together and have an event, or that sort of thing. So maybe it'll remind us that those are good things in life.
Well, I think that may very well happen. I think if people do get out and start to attend these events again, they will have a new appreciation for what they've missed. And, I guess you can only live on the internet and videos for a certain amount of time, even radio podcasts for that matter. So, we'll have to wait and see, but hopefully we can get back to normal soon. So, your upcoming book is Sinister Swamps, Monsters and Mysteries from the Mire. I love that title. Well, tell us a little bit about the book and why you wrote it.
Well, for over the years, I've done a lot of investigations that have involved swampy territories and, dabbled in that, even the Beast of Boggy Creek in southern Arkansas. It's kind of swampy out there, and the Lizard Man. And in the process of visiting all these swamps, I just always thought that they were some of the most, beautiful yet haunting places. And, I would always learn of other phenomenon that occurred, even though, maybe I'm specifically focusing on a cryptid case, but there was always other things. And so over the last decade, as I did some traveling and just research and this and that, I began to kind of, group them together. Different swamps would have all sorts of phenomenon, and I thought, this would be a cool thing to examine some of these major swamps in North America that had a multitude of phenomenon, and just instead of like sort of focusing on one sort of creature or one kind of phenomenon, is just talk about these geographically. And of course, anytime you needed a spooky, setting in Scooby-Doo or whatever, it was always the swamp. So, we all just love that sort of vibe that the swamp has, and it's just been a fun thing to just sort of write about a location like that that's inherently kind of spooky, and then talk about what is really some spooky stuff that goes on there, from cryptids to ghosts to spook lights, legends of cannibal witches and missing persons and lost villages, just all that kind of stuff. So it was a way for me to be able to just finally kind of write about all those fascinating things that I've always liked, but never had a sort of a book where I could explore all of it.
Yeah, in fact, you've written a few books and then actually been a part of documentaries that talk about these swamp monsters, a Beast of Boggy Creek, Lizard Man. It does seem to be a lot going on out there, and of course, the Lizard Man phenomenon in South Carolina is really, your book was fantastic, and it just really outlined all the craziness involved with that phenomenon.
Right. I mean, in that case, you had a sort of a creature from the Black Lagoon, if you will, kind of a creature, and again, just a swampy, rugged territory where, if some unknown creature were to exist, these would be the places where they could, because, bottomlands and things like that are very hard to cultivate or to settle, in general. And so even today, they're the places where you have some, especially in the South, you've got these miles and miles of just sort of, rugged and shadowy terrain. So I think it almost seems natural that if strange phenomenon is reported, it's often in those areas.
Yeah, your book, it actually covers a pretty good variety of these swampy areas or these bottomlands where a lot of this phenomena has occurred. Actually, one of the scariest encounters that I have ever read involved a swamp or bottomland in eastern Kansas, actually. And where this gentleman who was in his tree stand, had I guess it was a Bigfoot-like beast, literally walk up to him and grab his foot while he was in the tree stand. He was up there deer hunting, and that was almost like this thing just developed out of the swamp, and he had no idea what it was. But some of these stories are just really hair-raising. Which one is your favorite?
That's a hard one, because there are just so many cool stories, and one of the ones that is a little bit similar to that I've, as far as a sort of a cryptid or a ape-like creature, was in the Okefenokee Swamp of Georgia. And back in 1972, there was a family out there camping, and the teenage son, went off down, wandering off and exploring, and he heard something in the bushes, and some creeping around, and he thought, well, maybe my sister followed me and they're playing a prank or whatever. So he just kind of assumed that it was nothing, and went over there, and then all of a sudden he hears this horrible, terrifying shriek, and this ape-looking thing, comes out of the bushes and jumps on him and tries to sink its, rather sharp canines or fangs in, biting him, and he managed to fend it off. And then about that time, in all his yelling, his family came running up and scared this thing off, and it jumped across this creek and ran off. But obviously, there's Bigfoot sightings, and that's kind of, startling enough if you see one, but to have something jump out and to actually jump on you or grab you was kind of spooky. And so that, that's just one example of them. And, there's other stories in the book of, ghostly figures. There was a guy in the Congaree Swamp area of South Carolina that was doing an Army training mission out there, and it was dark, and some ghostly thing is he sees it, and he thinks it's a person until it gets close, and then realizes that it's not a living thing, and scares the guy to death. And I mean, this is an Army guy doing maneuvers in a rugged area, so not easily frightened. But stories like that, you got your vanishing hitchhikers and your more stories of people being buried in swamps, or there was a lot of cases where murders in the swamp, and just all sorts of ghastly sort of things that only seem natural in these swampy environments. But so the book, it's really hard to pick any one favorite, because it just kind of meanders between all sorts of phenomena and all sorts of levels of spooky things, whether it's something slithering in the water, a giant snake, which, could very well be a natural snake. It's just large, but when you see it in an environment like that, it's scary. Or, is it something ghostly or something more, unknown?
You did send me the some of the outline of the book, and you talk about the Cato Triangle. I'll be honest, I had never heard of that before. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, that's probably because I coined that in this book. So.
Oh, okay.
in the book, of course, I kind of, acknowledge that we have the Bermuda Triangle, of course, everybody knows, and the Bridgewater Triangle, which most people who study paranormal should know about, in Massachusetts, in which I do cover Hockomock Swamp, which is part of the Bridgewater Triangle. But I noticed that in the area here in the South between Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas, there's this very triangular shaped area that involved a long history of mostly cryptid activity. So, and I do say it's, while Bermuda Triangle obviously is a grander scale, this is specific to sightings of sort of man-ape, southern Sasquatch type creatures. But the way it broke out is because the top of the point is near Boggy Creek, which, the Boggy Creek Monster, and then it goes over to an area in Louisiana that has a history of sightings that also inspired a movie which was called Creature from Black Lake, which was a movie in the 70s, one of the better Bigfoot films. And then it goes west to Caddo Lake, which is a very swampy, spooky, it's the most picturesque swamp, certainly in the Texas area, and then over into Louisiana. And so I just thought, well, this is a triangle, and here I'm going to discuss all this stuff. So I'm forwarding the idea that we will call this the Caddo Triangle.
Well, that sounds good. It just seems, there are a few triangles out there. That's true. One of the investigators on my team actually lives right beside the Green Swamp, and she has gone in there a lot. And of course, she has been investigating the swamp ape or skunk ape for many years now. So, your opinion, what is the skunk ape? I mean, is there one area in Florida? And I know people have said they've seen it in Georgia, but is it a specific type of Bigfoot, or is it like a variety? What's your opinion on that?
Well, to me, in sort of a casual knowledge of it, the idea that the skunk ape is something different than Bigfoot, and a lot of the descriptions are always that it's more ape-like. It could be smaller even. If it stands upright, it doesn't, it's not necessarily 7 or 8 feet tall. It's certainly not the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest. Yet at the same time, if you really look at the witness statements, they kind of vary between some of them having, a creature that appears to be more ape-like, but a lot of them are just sort of your ubiquitous Bigfoot sighting. It stands upright. It's walking on 2 legs. It's covered in hair. But certainly the height can vary, as they all do, really. I mean,
right.
Bigfoots, if they do exist in small populations, they got to grow up. So no Bigfoots, they're not all just some, standard size. They're all going to vary, just like humans. And so that becomes a problem when in cryptozoology and trying to identify whether we have a phenomenon, or that's one specific type of creature, or is there multiple creatures, and why are they described differently? So I think if they were very consistent in the descriptions, it would be much easier to answer, because it'd be like, well, that region just has this specific thing, but it's just a hard answer, because I think that if they do exist, I think we have multiple species of this southern Sasquatch, all down here in the southeast, which would include Florida. And like you say, you've got some people, say, well, there's swamp apes in Georgia, and a lot of it is just the local terminology for the creatures. And it's not so much that the creature's different; it's more like somebody sees a Bigfoot-looking thing, and when you see that in Florida or in that area, people just go, oh, it's a skunk ape or a swamp ape. And so a lot of it's just simply the terminology, but ultimately they're all described very similarly, or variations that it's hard to pinpoint any one consistent attribute other than they're ape-like and they're covered in hair and they can walk on 2 legs.
Yeah, if I had to guess, I believe the Bigfoot or Sasquatch or skunk ape that are seen around the Gulf of Mexico area, swamps of the United States, from Texas to Florida, I think overall they're probably an indigenous species. Now, or flesh and blood, or however you want to describe it. Is that your assumption as well?
Yeah, it is, because just having examined quite a number of sightings and interviewed quite a number of people, because the South is kind of my area, I'm familiar with all places, but these are the places where I go more. So obviously I've interviewed more people, and I just, by and large, no one is reporting anything that's sort of outside the abilities of a indigenous natural animal. And animals can do amazing things. People say, oh, it sort of disappeared or what have you, but tigers can disappear into the woods, and cougars they're there 1 second and they're like a shadow, and this is their natural abilities. And so for me, without having any other proof, and not to say that there isn't another opinion or answer, I think that they would be flesh and blood. And I think the differences that we may see in the southern version, as opposed to perhaps Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest, is that they're living in a totally different environment, where it's very hot and humid and swampy. And so naturally, if a creature has lived there for, thousands of years, then they would adapt to that, and they would be certainly maybe need to be smaller, or they would need to be more ape-like in order to get around in that environment, as opposed to just a mountainous region in the Pacific Northwest. So I think the differences here are that they're a species of similar things, but the environment has forced some adaptations and changes in those specific ones over the years.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do believe that these cryptids that are found in are supposedly in these swampy areas are kind of fit for the biome, so to speak. They adjust however they need to adjust, and yeah, I do believe that myself, as well as up in the Pacific Northwest. There just seems to be that it's an area where they can they can actually live and adjust to, or be able to hide and to just live their lives, as opposed to sightings that are in other parts of the United States. So I agree with you. I think they're just suited for that type of environment in the swamps.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, those are the lingering questions that sort of just linger on.
Yeah. And there's so much as supposedly happens in the swamps. It's just not cryptids and, and I guess when you talk about paranormal, you can also tie in the occult, because, you hear all these stories. And in fact, I have had people send me stories in the past, or reports of seeing some crazy stuff in swamps, especially down the south, like in Alabama or Mississippi, where, somebody will go into a swamp area and start seeing all kinds of crazy stuff, like dolls hanging off of trees and, all kinds of weird voices and glowing apparitions and strange creatures they don't recognize. I guess the majority of the Gulf State swamps are probably like that, and that does pop up a lot. I guess you've run into a lot of that yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, like the creepy dolls, for example. That's
yeah,
Bear Creek Swamp in Alabama, which I cover. You always have, there's always some standards. It's like they almost always have, sightings of a Bigfoot-like creature. They typically have some ghostly activity, from everything from seeing Native American type ghosts to, modern looking dressed people. And then you have those oddball things, that there's not a lot of accounts of it, but they're just really weird, dolls and people seeing, something that's howling with a strange voice, or, a sighting of a strange bird type of a creature, almost prehistoric type things. Or in one case, there's a swamp in Texas called the Otine Swamp, which Texas you wouldn't think would be very swampy, but this is a really bizarre location where the swamp is just sort of in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of sort of a dry, arid area. And within that swamp, there's, legends of and sightings of a creature that is almost kind of shimmers, or it's black. It's so dark and black, it just blends in. And while one moment it sounds sort of Bigfoot-esque, it's certainly something different and something that you just can't quite explain. But, even I interviewed a very solid, rational, credible witness that had seen something down there in this area. And you just can't dismiss that. This isn't just all old legends and stuff. It's literally modern witnesses seeing something that nobody can quite explain. And swamps certainly have their share of those.
Yeah, I'm hoping we can follow up on that, because I did refer those sightings to you. And the ones that I'm talking about are the ones in Beauregard Parish. And there have been some upright canine sightings there recently. And like you said, they're very credible witnesses. And some of the sightings are pretty horrifying, actually. So, I agree with you. Those areas, those kind of out of the place areas, And like you said, you're talking about that specific creature or cryptid. It almost has like a supernatural aspect to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, they really do. I mean, you start getting into those type things, and they do, gets outside of the bounds of what seems biologically logical or natural, and that always, begs the question: are these biological entities we're looking at, or are they something beyond that? Because those are the ones that usually are associated with abilities or some strange twists that aren't just your average thing. They didn't just walk by and then just walked into the woods. They shimmer, or they appear in certain conditions of the moon or what have you. So, and those are fun to investigate because obviously they're spooky and they kind of stand out, I think, than others. But all that area in Louisiana, I mean, I could probably write a swamp book just on Louisiana. I mean, there's so much stuff. You just kind of have to find areas where there's a concentration of it, but certainly where those in the Beauregard Parish area, there's sightings of sort of your Rougarou type stuff, and you've got your long history of Bigfoot sightings that run up and down the Sabine River in that area. So it's definitely a good area.
Well, the one I guess you can call it cryptid, though. I mean, I've heard people say it's actually there. All these big panther sightings that have been down in there as well, and it's interesting because both witnesses who are like 20 miles apart from each other, but they both have actually witnessed these black panthers, and I assume that they are there. I've heard of black panthers or melanistic panthers in Florida before. I don't know if that is, but this particular one seems to have some pretty good size to it. So I guess it's possible. And actually, anything down there, I can believe it's very possible. I mean, So
yeah, and I mean, I've got the same kind of stories where, the Black Panther, which if people aren't familiar with that, when we refer to a panther, it's a mountain lion or a cougar as opposed to a jaguar or a leopard. And those, a melanistic version, which has no color, that would be black, are said to not exist. So that's the conundrum because, scientists and game wardens, they are adamant that there's no such thing as a black cougar, yet I've got a number of witnesses over in Honey Island Swamp, where you've got the Honey Island Swamp Monster, just investigating that as a byproduct. A lot of the guys go, well, I haven't seen that, but hey, I saw a black panther. And these are hunters. They know what they're looking at. I mean, but thus far, no proof, but it's definitely a phenomenon that kind of coexists, I think, almost with sightings of other creatures, Well,
during the Katrina, I heard a lot of different stories of what people were seeing swimming around in the water or showing up in the outskirts of New Orleans, even further out. And Black Panther was definitely one of those animals that people were seeing. And, in fact, there's also a story that I can't verify, but of like lizard man type beings as well. I don't know what you have heard, but there seem to have been a lot of things going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
So let's talk about another. Well, you talked about Honey Island, of course, that's Louisiana, and Great Dismal. Now, Great Dismal, if people aren't familiar with it, is southeast Virginia and northeast North Carolina. It's kind of it's a huge swamp, but there are a lot of strange stories that are coming out there, and I see your notes here about canids. I don't know if I've ever received a canid report. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, those are some of the older. Well, I'd say some of those are older, and some of those are newer. And you're right. The Great Dismal is just a huge area, and almost when people envision sort of a swamp with the cypress trees and the ghostly Spanish moss, Great Dismal, really captures that vibe. And some years ago, back in the 1800s, there was a rash of sightings of a sort of a huge black dog, and this was documented by a lot of newspapers. And of course, it's one of those cases where the people living in and among a small town near the swamp have to try to set out to hunt this thing down, and it would always kill livestock and dogs, and people feared that it would attack a person. And for a while, it would cause a lot of problems, and then the theory was it lived in the swamp, and eventually it would sort of disappear. And so I thought it was somewhat ironic or coincidental that you had a history of that documented in the newspaper some years back in the Great Dismal. And then in modern times, several years ago, there was a family that lived on the edge of the swamp, and the young man who lived in the house reported seeing what he described as sort of a wolf-like human thing look through the window at him. Very, not only do you live next to a swamp, but you have this sort of basically a dog man look at you through the window. And that was kind of a creepy sighting, and that was in the Great Dismal. And I think that's one that's been documented on some Dogman report areas as well. But yeah, that's just some of the stuff going on that you can kind of tie into things that had happened in the past, and then things that happen in present times. Though again, not something that there's not a lot of sightings. It's not going on every day, but it's something that pops up every once in a while. It's just spooky enough to make you wonder what could be living out, in the center of that swamp.
Yeah, now that I think about it, and of course, Butch Witkowski and I have been looking into this upright canine phenomena here in Pennsylvania for a couple of years now. And it does seem, and I'd say a majority of the sightings that we have received have been in swampy areas or bottomland, which I never really been able to figure out. I don't know why that is. I guess it's someplace where they can hide. They just know people aren't going to come in there. But it does seem to be an area where they seem to hang out at.
Yeah, I think it's possibly just the nature of those areas, because as we expand our urban and civilized developments in modern times, those swampy areas still kind of remain the most undeveloped areas, aside from, say, mountains or Appalachians or what have you. But as far as pockets in the South, those are just some of the places that you can't very easily develop, and so they remain the one place where, if strange, mysterious creatures do exist, that's where they could kind of retreat or live within that. And and I mean, all on top of that, you've got to have an area with a lot of water and a lot of food sources, and something the size of a dog man or a Bigfoot would have a lot of trouble living, say, in some parts of Texas, in the central area.
Right.
Just simply because there's not enough cover, there's not enough food sourced for such a big, a big entity. But whereas you've got a swampy bottomland, you've got a lot of seclusion, you've got plenty of food, you got plenty of water. It just makes a lot of sense why we would have a lot of reports in those areas. It just kind of seems logical.
You know, the one thing that really fascinates me a lot is the Everglades, big cypress, and these invading species. What is going to eventually come out of there because of this? Do you believe it's possible that some type of hybrid beast would develop in those areas because of all the invading species?
Well, I mean, I suppose if you have the right two combinations, you could. And surely just the nature of an invasive species like the Burmese pythons, for example, can get in there. And again, you've got a swampy area where nature just runs out of control, and they breed so quickly that suddenly they don't have any natural predators. They're just totally out of hand. And so while pythons are not an unproven species by any means, they suddenly are able to breed, and they have so much food that they just become huge, and to the point where obviously the locals are in fear for children or people that live near the edges of these places. These things could eat a person. And so,
sure.
Part of the Sinister Swamps is literally the things that can breed in there from, just the availability of food and resources, and then suddenly becomes monstrous unto itself, such as these pythons. And, of course, the Everglades, you've got the ever popular theories or tales of an alligator man or alligator people. You see that a lot, almost cited on a lot of, incursory mentions on blogs or in books. But of course, I went specifically to find how are there sightings of, quote, alligator people, which would sort of be some kind of a hybrid, I guess. I mean, I guess different than a lizard man. But, what I discovered was that there's not necessarily, again, just a long list of sightings of something like that. You could always find one or two fairly credible ones that you just couldn't explain, or that just was so bizarre, of creatures that didn't really, for example, this sort of an alligator, bipedal type alligator thing, not so much that it's humanoid, it's just that it's not a typical alligator, or that it can rise up on two legs, and it looks very prehistoric. So you would have that to where it's like not so fanciful, but just plausible enough to go, man, if there's something like that in there, I don't want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder about that. I mean, is it possible for, like you said, the alligators to be able to adapt to be able to become bipedal, even just for a short period of time? But that does seem to be one scary phenomenon I would never want to run across. It's just like these upright canines. I don't think I'd ever want to run across one of those either, because, some of the reports we have received over the years are just plain scary. I mean, they really are. And, unlike a Bigfoot or something else, these things don't seem to want to back off. They do stand their ground. So, who knows?
I think there's just something to that. It's ingrained in our human psyche that if something can stand up on two legs like we can, suddenly that is frightening. Like lizard man, dog man, alligator people. I think we've gotten our mind around Bigfoot. I mean, Bigfoot obviously standing on 2 feet, 2 legs, bipedal. But I think we've kind of almost culturalized Bigfoot to where the thought of it isn't as scary as thinking about a dog man or a lizard man. Those are just frightening things that we just don't know enough about. Whereas now, if you saw a Bigfoot in the woods, no matter, I mean, it would erase all whatever fuzzy, warm views you may have of it, because it would be certainly startling. But I think if you saw a dog man, obviously, and I think something that was more aggressive would be ultimately disturbing. I mean, it would just be, it could mess you up.
You know, of course, I've been looking into this humanoid winged cryptid phenomena now more recently. And have there been sightings of these type of cryptids in these swamp areas as well? Had you run across any of those stories?
Yeah, those, in the case of Hockomock Swamp and I think in the Great Dismal, especially in Hockomock, you had a good amount of sightings that have been documented of people seeing flying, mostly in terms of prehistoric looking, like
pterosaur.
Like pterosaurs, sometimes thunderbirds, mostly pterosaurs, which kind of almost makes a little bit of sense because it's a swampy area, and you almost kind of associate a swamp with this sort of primordial Jurassic Park type thing. And you know, there was always a long, you know, it wasn't just like one person saw something. It would be something that would be documented in multiple newspapers, multiple witnesses, and often something that would span a long period of time. So in the case of Hockomock Swamp, that's where I saw the most concentrated flying stuff. Now, as far as something that would be more flying humanoid, like Mothman, I didn't find a lot of those specific in the swampy areas. That seemed to be more, well, I mean, none of this is very consistent, but, you know, in the case of Mothman or whatever, I mean, you know, McClintock Wildlife Area's got swampy areas, but as far as in terms of what I did in the book was look for literally where swamp was the prevalent geographic characteristic, but I didn't find in those cases where I had really hardly any flying humanoid accounts.
Yeah, that Hockomock, that Bridgewater Triangle area in particular, there's a lot of crazy stuff that comes out of it. Puckwudgies, little people, and you know, I wouldn't surprise me to hear about pterosaur sightings in there as well. But you know, this pterosaur phenomena, and I think it goes way back as well, because there have been stories for several hundred years of these beings being seen, especially out in the West. And of course, you know, Chad Lewis documented and wrote the book about the sighting in Iowa. The
Van Meter.
Yeah, the Van Meter visitor. Very interesting, and you know, of course, that area is also has caves and such. So, you know, it does seem that these pterosaur-like beings are definitely something that may very well be going on, because, you know, we've run into a lot of that in Illinois looking into this winged humanoid phenomena. And of course, there have been the legends of the Ropin out in Papua New Guinea for years and years. It does seem like something that very well could be an actual being.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, a couple of years ago, Ken Gerhard and I went up to Oklahoma and interviewed two sets of witnesses that had seen a pterosaur-like flying bird, and they described it in terms of literally, it looked like a pterodactyl. It didn't have any feathers. It looked leathery, you know, had a pointy type head and all that stuff. And it was in both sightings, there was 2 people in both of those sightings that saw the thing at the same time. And that's, you don't often get that, where you have multiple witnesses in 2 things. And both of these sets of witnesses did not know each other. And what they were describing in the time period they cited it was very close together in terms of geography and in terms of time. And it's like, we're both just like, you can't make this stuff up. These people, this isn't a hoax or it can't be a coincidence. Whatever they saw seemed to be the same thing, and it seemed to be in the same area. So while we can't definitively say it was a pterosaur, it seemed as though it was, and these witnesses were adamant and very credible in what they saw.
Well, from anywhere from your area in Texas south down into Mexico, I mean, these winged cryptid sightings are just legend. I mean, there are just so many different ones. Let alone all the other crazy stuff people have been seeing, especially in the hill country. And you talk about the hill country in Texas, and of course, I've gotten some very interesting Bigfoot sightings and reports in that area as well. But there's a lot of other stuff going on there also.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those places, and Texas is big, so you have a very wide variety of phenomenon just encompassed in one state. All the way from certainly Bigfoot is prevalent to there's goat man legends. There's down in the southern portion along the Rio Grande, you've got Thunderbirds, you've got pterosaur sightings, you've got
Lacusa.
Lachusa. It's like a kind of a owl-like entity that sort of, to me, is sort of part folklore legend, part cryptid. Where you've got, in fact, I've got a witness that I was in Laredo, which is right on the border of Mexico, some years ago on tour, and some guy told me about this event with this kind of giant owl type thing. And so just about everywhere I go in Texas, I mean, you can find some really strange stuff going on just about any area. So
I don't know what it is about Laredo, but I've gotten some weird sightings in Laredo. The manta ray shaped flying beings. I've had a couple reports in Laredo. I actually had a standing Mothman type sighting in Laredo. I don't know what it is, but that just seems to be an area. And I guess from there the whole way up into San Antonio, that whole southern Texas area is just loaded with stuff. Of course, I've had those mini T-Rex sightings for years coming out of there, and of course Ken can tell you the same thing. There's so much coming out of there. I believe it's just one of the major hotspots in the United States.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It keeps us busy down here. I mean,
a
lot of times people will ask me if I'm gonna write about something like the Jersey Devil, for example, and I'm like, well, while I like that, the legends and the sightings and stuff, but I like to my books. People know that I usually go to the places, and I boots on the ground. So I'm like, man, I got so much here. I'm so busy down here that I don't know if I need to go to New Jersey.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I've been there, but but yeah, there's just so much going on in any one area that we're just as busy as we could possibly get. And I know you have the same problem. There's just not enough time in the day or the finances to follow up on all the stuff that we get that seems like worthy of following up. You just can't. You couldn't follow up on all of it.
I just wish I could send somebody to every decent report that I receive. I mean, unfortunately, it's just impossible to do that. But it is amazing, some of the stuff and some of the credibility, high credibility of some of these witnesses. People have definitely seen something. I don't know if they really understand what they're seeing enough to give you a description that makes any sense a lot of times, but they had definitely seen something, or they think they have seen something. And, I kind of give everybody the benefit of the doubt when they, I guess, to possibly figure out what they saw.
Right. Yeah. I mean, even, and over the years, I've interviewed enough people that, I can pretty much tell the ones that have seen something that can't be explained, and the ones that perhaps are wanting to see something, I guess is a good way to put it. But there, by and large, most reports are very credible, and the fact is, and that's the thing. People think that people are making this stuff up. It's like nonsense. Now, we can't prove what they saw, but I can say with a certain degree of confidence that they saw something, and it wasn't normal. It was something they're trying to find answers for, and that's why they're reporting these things, and that's why they're telling the story, because they themselves can't quite explain it. And while we don't have we can't just pull here's a pterosaur carcass. This is probably what you saw. We can't offer them that kind of closure, but at least we can say, hey, you're not the only one that's seen something strange that can't be explained. And that I think is, something that that keeps us the drive to keep doing it, because you can be confident that people have seen these things, and it's not just some made up phenomenon.
Well, the book is Sinister Swamps, Monsters and Mysteries from the Mire. You said it's most likely going to be released in 2 weeks or so?
Yeah, there was some slight delays on the thing. It'll be out, I'm hoping 2 weeks. It was originally May 19th, but I think we're looking more at like May 28th is probably the date. But either way, if people, follow my author page on Facebook or what have you, there will be grand announcements here in the next couple of weeks as to when they can grab a copy of this. So it will be certainly, I will let everyone know.
Well, I look forward to reading it. It does sound like it's a very fascinating book. A lot of different stuff I haven't even heard of. So I hope the best for you with the sales and the reviews on this. Now, I know you have a lot going or not going on in the future as far as going to events. Anything else going on? Do you have any films, projects that are coming up with, in particular, small town monsters?
Yeah, that's one thing that's Seth has not been slowed down too much on production of some of the new movies that he's working on, and I will be narrating the upcoming film called The Mothman Legacy.
Oh yeah,
as a follow-up to our Mothman of Point Pleasant we did several years ago. So I'll be the narrator on that. So that we'll be working on that this summer. Yeah, I had a few other things that not only, of course, events have been canceled or postponed, but I was supposed to do a PBS special on the Boggy Creek case, which that filming got indefinitely on hold. So unfortunately, a lot of stuff is just, been postponed for now, but I'm sure, as always, once it picks back up, I'll have more to do than I can possibly do. So,
well, I'm quite sure a lot of us are going to be very busy when this thing clears out, because there has been so much that's been delayed because of it. So, when things start getting going again, I'm definitely going to have you back on. And that Mothman Legacy seems to be going to be a very interesting film. I referred a few witnesses to Seth for that, and the premise itself sounds like very interesting. So I'm glad you're doing the narration on it. That's great.
Yeah, I look forward to that, and then he just gets better with every film, and the whole team has just really done a great job on these, and I'm certainly glad to be a part, and I'm glad that I'm, as a companion film to the Mothman of Point Pleasant, be able to narrate Mothman Legacy and sort of have that bookend together.
So, Lyle, thanks for coming on the show again, and I hope we'll be talking soon.
Absolutely. I enjoy it.
Well, you take care now, and you have a good weekend.
Thanks so much.
Mm. Now, if you have an unexplained encounter or sighting, feel free to contact me through the Phantoms and Monsters blog site. If you're interested in supporting Phantoms and Monsters and Arcane Radio, you can use the PayPal donation buttons on the blog and the newsletter. Now, your continued support is very appreciated. My new book, When Cryptids, Humanoids, Monsters, and Anomalous Creatures Casebook, is now available on Amazon. I want to again thank Lyle Blackburn for joining me this evening, and I want to thank you for listening to the show. Good night, stay healthy, and have a safe and enjoyable weekend.